It's always interesting to me when a business closes its doors or a company goes bankrupt or something, because there's always a part where people kind of mourn the end of the business. They're like, oh, it sucks. That was here and now it's not here anymore. And then they always go to this second part where they say, like, oh, they did that, but they should have done this. Here's where they went wrong. If they would have done that, then they'd still be around. But nobody ever answers the question, how long was this supposed to go for? Because implicitly, the answer to that is forever. This was supposed to exist in perpetuity, which sounds absurd when you say it because, I mean, look, you don't have to be a historian to know that the history of business is one of businesses opening and eventually closing, things starting and then eventually stopping, because that's just how business works. But for some reason, people always assume that their present circumstances are just going to extend into infinity. And if they don't extend into infinity, that means somebody did something wrong. Somebody cheated or made a big mistake. Instead of just thinking that these things just have a cycle and eventually they do end. I think there is just a natural human fear of decline because it is kind of scary to think about that everything that's around will eventually be gone. Instead of thinking that that's just kind of natural, everything is supposed to go away eventually. You see this especially in like show business with famous actors or like musicians. And it's like, oh, this guy used to be famous and then he fell off. What happened? And they want to point to, they did this and they made some sort of mistake. Instead of thinking that, look, it's kind of crazy they got famous in the first place. So few people reach that level that, yes, of course, it's not going to last forever because somebody else has to take that spot. And that's how show business has been since forever. But no, they always want to say, oh, that guy fell off. It's like they want to look down on him for just going through the natural cycle of rising and falling. And you see this with cities too. I mean, I live in New York City. I've been here for a while. And for as long as I've been here, people have been complaining that the city's not what it used to be. There is literature going back decades of people talking about how New York City has changed, as if it was just supposed to always be a certain way. And it's like, oh, and then the banks came in, they changed everything, and now it can't be cool anymore. Instead of thinking like, no, it was cool for a while, but eventually things did have to change because circumstances changed. I mean, look, Manchester, England used to be the center of the industrial world. Had a while where that was the place where you built things in Manchester. Then eventually things changed. And now Manchester is what it is, and it's not that nice. Same thing with Detroit. In, Ford and GM, and they had a whole moment with Motown and everything. Then eventually things moved on. Now they make cars in Mexico. You could criticize the specifics of how things happen, but were you really expecting Detroit to be nice forever? Does that sound sustainable? I think the problem people have, especially when they talk about cities, is people tend to visualize a city as being something other than just people. Cities exist for people, and everything that you like about a city exists because people came together to make it happen. I mean, you think about like, the Harlem Renaissance. That was a moment that happened because a bunch of people came together in a certain place at a certain time, and they did a bunch of stuff, and then eventually it kind of went away. And you can point to what people could have done to make it last longer, what caused it to change, but it's like, instead of doing all that, maybe you should just appreciate the fact that it happened at all, because it is kind of surprising how the way things worked out. People want cities to be like a museum where you just walk in and everything is there for you, and all you got to do is look around. It's like, no, to make a city great, it involves people who are trying to make it into a thing. Same thing with San Francisco, 1967, Summer of Love. That just happened because a bunch of hippies just kind of showed up and it became a thing. That wasn't the government telling people, hey, come to San Francisco. If anything, the government was trying to keep people out. And they came anyways, and they made history. And now, 60 something years later, people are still mourning the end of it. It's like, oh, why did things change? It used to be like that. Now it's a bunch of tech guys. It's because it was never supposed to last forever. It went for a while and then it moved into something else. Same thing with LA in the 50s and the 60s. It was really glamorous and Hollywood and old Hollywood. And then eventually that stops because there's only so much you can do. I think there is something that really, there is a psychological aspect to it. You hear this a lot when people talk about the government, especially. They like talking about, look, what are we going to build for our grandkids? What are our grandkids going to get out of what we're doing right now? And I really think that whole mindset is psychologically damaging for people. It's too much to think about. We can't be responsible for our lives, our kids' lives, and our grandkids. That is not what the human brain is made to consider. Just think we're all here now. All the humans that are around now are descendants of humans that have been around for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And it wasn't until the last couple hundred years that anybody even considered their grandkids and their great-grandkids and what the planet was going to be like. Why would they? They were busy, building fires and stuff because that's what people are supposed to do. Look at the animal kingdom. There is no animal that thinks about its grandkids. Animals focus on staying alive and, appreciating the moment as it's happening. All of this grandkid talk is how you end up with the current austerity regime that's happening in the US government and in Europe, where people are just slashing budgets and making life worse for people just for the sake of some imaginary grandkids. Which, by the way, people aren't even having kids anymore because it's too expensive. So what are we even saving all this money for? We need to focus on appreciating our life as it is now, instead of thinking about what's going to happen in the distant future. Because if we keep thinking about what's happening in the distant future, we're not going to leave them with anything that's actually worth keeping. Imagine if people had gone into the Harlem Renaissance thinking, man, we got to build something that's going to be around for 1,000 years. They never would have made, jazz music. All that stuff wouldn't have happened because they would have tied themselves up in knots thinking about it. Going back to the business thing, though, I really think there is a healthier way that we can think about these things. Like in my neighborhood, there is an ice cream shop that only opens up like when the weather's nice. I don't even know if there's like an exact date. I feel like it opens up around May and then it closes when it gets cold around November. And it just does that every year. And nobody ever says, oh, that business failed because, they should have switched to hot chocolate in the winter. That's how they could have made more money. It's like, no, that's not how it's supposed to work. People want ice cream when it's warm. And then when it's not warm anymore, we can close our doors. That's, I think, a much healthier approach to life in general, is as a pop-up shop. This business is going to be around for as long as it's going to be around. And then when we're done, we're done. We're not stopping because we failed. We're stopping because the circumstances have changed. And now it's cold outside and we're not selling ice cream. That's how we should think about life, because that allows you to appreciate things that are happening in the moment. You can even extend this out to the country as a whole and to even just the democratic project. You got to think the founding fathers did not imagine that America would last as long as it did. Pretty famously, they all kind of thought it was going to last for a few generations and then things would move on to something else. America is currently about 250 years old, and we're the longest running current democracy because it is very hard to keep a democracy together. By definition, it's going to be tricky. And we're doing our best to fix the system and make things work. But I feel like we need to acknowledge the fact that this wasn't ever going to last forever. Nobody ever, and none of the presidential candidates ever acknowledged the fact that no one ever answers the question, hey, how long is America supposed to be around? Because imagine somebody saying, try it at home right now. Say out loud, I thought America was going to last forever. You sound stupid, right? Think back through history. Every other country has risen and eventually fallen. What is it about America that you thought was just going to last in perpetuity? I mean, the only thing we can really compare this to in terms of democracies is like the Roman Republic. And I mean, dig deep into the circumstances of the Roman Republic. It was not America. It was much smaller and a lot of people couldn't vote. So it lasted for as long as it did. And then it turned into the, Holy Roman Empire. And that lasted for a long time too. And eventually that ended because things have to end. So maybe that's a much healthier way for us to think about America as a thing that's started and eventually will stop. Because that means we can focus on what comes next instead of tying ourselves in knots trying to chase the past and fix things that are clearly unfixable and can only result in a compromise that's going to make people furious. So maybe we should just think about America as a pop-up business. It's like, hey, we're going to open up a thing and it's going to last for a while. And then when it stops working, we're going to do a new thing because clearly what we're doing now is not working. So let's just take what we have and make something new. It's November and we're going to stop selling ice cream because it's cold outside.